is Straight to the Source, your destination for food, views and big ideas. Brought to you by two of the best in the business, Tawnya Bahr and Lucy Allon. Join them to discover some of Australia's most dynamic food, hospitality and agribusiness leaders.
Hello and welcome to Food, Views and Big Ideas. I'm Tawnya Bahr.
And I'm Lucy Allon, and this is the podcast from us here at Straight to the Source.
In this podcast, we will be introducing you to the people who are driving our food and hospitality industry forward. Whether it be on the land, in the water, in the kitchen, or from the boardroom.
Each of our guests are playing a significant role in the evolution of Australia's food identity and culture, and we want you to know who they are, their views and their big ideas. We're coming to you today from the traditional lands of the Gadigal people, and we'd like to begin by paying our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and we extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here with us today.
Let's tell the listeners who we're talking with today.
Yeah, so today we're talking to Matt Stone and Jo Barrett, who are two chefs that are all about challenging the status quo in a quest to unravel this big question around living and eating more sustainably. And so the conversation we're having with them is about this living experiment that they've been involved in, which is the Future Food System in Melbourne, which is a self-sustaining, zero-waste, productive house in Melbourne that is all about demonstrating the potential of how our homes can provide shelter, produce food, and generate energy.
Can you imagine being smack dab in the middle of Melbourne CBD and like getting out of bed, putting on your bathrobe, making a coffee, and then you have these strangers that are walking by?
Yeah, and knocking on the door, probably asking for a coffee. Yeah, it would be really intense, and they actually touch on that in the conversation.
So you chatted to them last year?
Yeah, so this conversation was late last year, and they were living in the house 24/7, and it's so interesting to hear the learnings they gained, the challenges they faced, and how it's really informing what's possible in the future.
So it's pretty timely to release this interview now as the project comes to an end next week. You know, when the house, it's going to be moved, isn't it, to its final resting place in Victoria?
Yeah, it is. So it was really nice to visit them earlier this week and just see it for one final time in Melbourne before it moves. But what's great is that it will still be lived in. It just won't be this sort of living experiment that's on show to the world.
And now they've gone on to do other things.
Yeah, and they've got some really exciting projects going on.
Matt has relocated to the Northern Rivers and he's been discovering producers up there, and it's been great to watch his Instagram feed to see what he's getting up to. But he's also just announced an exciting new phase for his career. He's joined a restaurant group which has 2, soon to be 3 venues. The Eltham Hotel, a classic Aussie pub, Ciao Mate in Bangalow, and a new restaurant yet to be named, which in the short term, the pop-up name is called Chow Down.
Which I love.
They should keep that.
They probably will keep it. I'm sure that will stick. Yeah, and Jo's been living on Flinders Island in Tasmania actually for the past few months. She's been living on a farm. She's been working really closely with producers down there.
Have you ever been to Flinders
No,
Island?
I'd love to go.
Yeah, it's on my bucket list.
Yeah, I'd really love to go.
Maybe we need to do a chef's tour down there.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. Hopefully her pop-up bake shop, I should say, will still be happening. She's still got her wonderful Have a Go series publication, so we'll pop some links in the show notes, but you guys should definitely check that out. It's all about, how you can tackle cheese making and bread making and charcuterie at home. And she's writing a book, she told us this morning. Yep. So she is working on a book all about how to live a sustainable metropolitan life. So very much informed by what she's been doing for the last year.
Yeah, well, she would have drawn great inspiration from living in the house for a year.
Yep. So she's working on that now, and that will be released next May 2023. So we'll pop all these links in the show notes.
Awesome.
So maybe we'll get the conversation started. I kicked off by asking Matt where the sustainability journey began for him. So let's listen in.
Sure. I guess as a young chef, I kind of discovered pretty early on the more ethically produced a product or an ingredient was, it generally tasted better. So that was sort of my initial journey into sustainable food production, is that just simply the food tasted better. And then about 12 years ago, I was working in a fine dining restaurant then, and there was lots of sous vide cooking and lots of waste. And it was something that I kind of acknowledged but didn't really make any change to it. And then about 12 years ago, meeting Joost Bakker, who's our partner and collaborator and has been for over a decade now, working with him, I think it was about 12 years ago, that really just changed things. And sort of overnight, I went from cooking really fine dining, food in a really sort of, hectic sort of fine dining restaurant to running the greenhouse, which was a breakfast, lunch and dinner operation, huge covers that I'd never cooked for that many people before, with this whole new set of boundaries. And I just had the attitude of just saying yes to not using plastic bags to cook in, yes to, getting our ingredients in bulk, milk coming in kegs and all these kind of things that I'd never really even thought of before. But Joost was really insistent on these were the systems that we had to use, and we just worked it out. So that was sort of how I, found myself where I am today.
Because that was a groundbreaking project at the time. I remember you really sort of took people's attention in terms of what you were doing, like you said, not using plastics, getting produce in bulk, and really focusing on that no waste approach.
Well, we just had the attitude of we'll just say yes and we'll make it up as we go. Like I barely made bread, and we're milling grain to make bread, for breakfast service, which is a pretty crazy sort of undertaking.
Crazy idea then, but much more the norm now. And Jo, what about you? Was there a moment for you where you sort of really felt that things needed to change from the way you were cooking or approaching cooking and food?
I think always throughout cooking, I'd looked at ingredients coming into the restaurant and questioned where they were coming from, and not necessarily in a way that I thought I could do anything about it, but more so we were getting sides of salmon in, and I just always remember opening up the boxes and thinking, that's a lot of fish, and how is that possible to keep doing that? And then looking into the bins and seeing a lot of plastic or just rubbish in general, I just always questioned it. And then, where did things come from? And as I kind of progressed through cooking, and then when I was at the bakery at Tivoli Road, and we were using so much flour, and it was such a simple ingredient. And it's probably where I started looking at ingredients differently. Like it wasn't just a bag of flour. It was like, wow, how much land did that take to grow? And, Michael James is really produce driven. And it probably put me more onto a path around using really high quality produce and that were farmed ethically, because like Matt was saying, they tasted really good. You got to meet the people growing it and producing it. And I really enjoyed cooking like that because you're kind of connected the whole way. And I guess working in a bakery, the cooking is really skill driven, and we were making everything. So I guess the two just melded together of I knew where these bulk products were coming from, but I felt okay using them because they were coming from a good place. And then I guess when Matt and I were at Oak Ridge, and then we were, at the time, I didn't think we were doing very much around sustainability in the environment. But now I look back now and, growing food, composting, whole animal butchery, what we achieved there, I guess I just wanted to do more and more and more, which has led to what the project we're doing now. I guess it wasn't one specific point, but just when everything adds up together, you can see that it's actually possible.
Yeah.
And maybe at the start of my cooking career, I was questioning these things, but I never thought that it was possible to do anything about it.
Yeah. So the opportunity at Oak Ridge, I guess, really gave you the chance to get much more involved and hands-on with the process of selecting where your produce came from, because you started growing your own produce there as well. Did you guys put the kitchen garden in at Oak Ridge?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, that happened in the first 6 weeks, and Tony and Alana were really trusting for us. It took a little while. Like the first year we put the garden in and didn't, we had grand plans, but realized that it takes a bit of time to do things like that, and it's long term. But to be able to do what we were doing on the numbers that we were doing, and I guess that's where Matt's experience with the greenhouse and silo and brothel, just never faulting from your core beliefs around, okay, no, well, we're not going to use seafood, even though we're, got wedding bookings coming in, or, that was a real eye-opener for me when I was questioning those things to then now, even though I had worked at brothel with Joost, and Matt and I had done the pop-up in Sydney, just doing it on a big scale and seeing that, yeah, he never faults from those things. I was like, oh, look, we can do it. And yeah, it was a real eye-opener that we were serving so many people, but sticking to our beliefs.
Yes, have to stay strong to that, don't you? Did you get a lot of pushback from your guests and consumers in that sort of change that you took Oakridge through from, I read somewhere that you had 5 or 6 menus when you started there, and you managed to sort of bring that back to this very local, regional reflection of the Yarra Valley. Is that something you found people were open to, or did you have to really sort of challenge consumers to believe and trust in you, not just the owners, but, the guests as well?
Well, we had just, a few of the regulars kind of going, oh, you wouldn't mind having that dish back, but in general, everyone was pretty open to it and welcoming. And then towards the end of our time there, people were coming because you could taste the Yarra Valley or taste Hillsville in the food that we were cooking. And I guess that's the beauty of cooking like that. You get known for a region and representing that region. So when there is travel, people want to come and see what it's like in that area. So I think people were really open to it. And that's what we're finding with the project now. There is that thirst for, local food, and you want to feel good about what you're eating in the sense of it's nourishing, but also that it comes from a good place.
Yeah. So Matt, going back to, again, the Greenhouse Perth days, just because it was so much at the forefront of what you're doing now, how did you bring your team on board to believe in what you were doing? It's not something that you're really exposed to as an apprentice or, out on the floor, and you have to have your team believing in what you're doing. Did you have to really encourage them to go on that journey with you, or were they right there behind you?
It was really difficult. I was only 21 running the restaurant, and, it was a huge responsibility. I still think it was a huge risk from Yost and Paul to give me that opportunity. We're a ratbag bunch of just kids, really. I think we had about 8 of us in our opening team, and I know my sous chef, Courtney, who came with me from Star Anise, Courtney Gibb. He's a baker now. And he and I just kind of made it up as we went. But yeah, he was the oldest. He was a year older than me. So it was a 21, 22-year-old and some just qualified chefs and apprentices. And we just kind of all had the attitude of, let's just give it a go. So I think everyone was on board. We had no idea what we were doing. We were just being guided by Yosty and producers. And we just really, everyone really got involved. And we had a lot of really great cooks come through that kitchen, which was really awesome. And actually the restaurant now is actually owned and run by one of my apprentices, 7, 8 years ago from the greenhouse, which is a really nice sort of thing as well.
Well, that's a great result.
Yeah.
And so in terms of bringing young people in the industry on that journey, I know that you both spent a lot of time nurturing the skills of your team at Oakridge. And as we just mentioned before, from when you took on the Oakridge restaurant to when you left, you guys went from buying in a lot to then growing your own, but also really making everything. Do you think that's the way the industry needs to go to be able to sort of move forward in a more sustainable way? Yeah,
it's a difficult one, because balancing the labor of making all of your own charcuterie and cheese and stuff like that and particularly if you're using ethically produced ingredients, like buying milk from pasture-fed Jersey cows direct from a farmer, buying whole pigs that have been fed on, spent botanicals from Four Pillars Gin. All of these products are expensive, and then labor's really expensive, and obviously trying to look after your staff to not work, more than 40 hours a week. So there's a lot of balancing. So it is a really difficult thing to do. It's definitely cheaper and easier to not do it that way. But we took the approach at Oakridge that we need to represent the area, and if we can't make it, we're not going to serve it. So, that's wwhy we did all of the butchery, milling all of the grain to make flour. I mean, grain was probably only one of the few ingredients we brought from outside of the Yarra Valley. But still, I'm very proud of the fact that, we ran that really large restaurant doing functions, weddings, and we didn't serve one plate of seafood in 5 years. And not that seafood shouldn't be served, but I feel it needs to be served in the right place and the right context. And I think looking out over the rolling hills of the Yarra Valley doesn't give a sense of, I feel like a piece of snapper. Like, it's just not quite right. Yep. I think it's definitely more challenging. But these are skills that, they're really artisanal, ancient skills of preservation and making delicious food. And, so many cooks have, cooks of 10 years have never made a salami. Cooks of 10 years have never made fresh curd. And I think we've got this real convenience in our food system that is generating waste and making food wasteful because it's coming packaged. And, I think what we have done and what we're doing now is nothing new by any means. We look back at proven primitive techniques and introduce technology and new ideas to them to produce food. So I think you just have to be adamant at it. And I think it's much more enjoyable. You know, our team was with us for a very long time at Oak Ridge because we're constantly learning new skills and training each other and doing new things. So you stay much more motivated and much more enthusiastic to be at work if you're making stuff and learning rather than just cutting open packets.
Yeah, really engaged. You mentioned time just then, and it's interesting. I'm reading a book called The Missing Ingredient by a UK author called Jenny Linford. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it is about time. It's about how time is so important in cooking. And I think we're in this sort of culture of convenience that people value fast, but it just doesn't necessarily get you the best results, which is what we're all really learning. And that's exactly what you just touched on there. So from Oak Ridge to what you're doing now, Future Food System, it's a pretty big leap from growing your own food and running a restaurant to then actually living in a self-sustaining, zero waste house right in the middle of Melbourne's CBD. You built it as well, didn't you? You built it, you're living in it, you're cooking from it. Tell us a little bit more about the Future Food System and how you sort of went from Oak Ridge to that project.
Well, the project changed a bit from the original idea, which when we were at Oak Ridge, Yost kind of said, oh, would you be open to living in a house that produces all its own food and power? And, you know, we'll just demonstrate that it's possible to reconnect with our food system and live amongst it. And that could be a good demonstration that it is possible. And then, you know, Matt and I were like, yeah, no worries. And part of that was you still have to work full time because we want to show that it is possible for just general public that you could still maintain a normal life. And then the only difference is that you go to your balcony to pick your food rather than going to the supermarket.
Yeah.
So, and then it kind of evolved over about 5 years just because of, you know, permits and things like that. And then towards the end of those 5 years, that's when Federation Square reached out and said to Yost, would you like to put the house in Fed Square? And then he said to us, you know, how do you feel about that? And I don't know if we both really considered what that meant, but we were open to the idea. And then, yeah, last year in July, the shipping, or not the shipping containers, but the steel frames got dropped in. And then, yeah, we got to see the house being resurrected just in front of Deacon Edge on the Yarra River. And it kind of, I guess, being a part of the build and watching it, it really clicked with just how much detail Yost had put into this house around not using FFC certified timber and using agroforestry and the whole idea of chemicals where you live, recycling and zero waste building as well. And I guess I didn't realize how much waste was in the building industry, and where you live, yeah, you really are a part of it. So watching that, it did help click what the whole project was about. And then I guess that finished in December, and then we started growing food. Well, food was actually already, we were harvesting in November before the build was finished. And it was a difficult build just because no one had ever built a house in Federation Square that was also going to be a restaurant. And it was a complex situation. So there were a few delays. And then, yeah, I guess the project changed to then being in such a public area, we wanted to invite people in for dinners and to be a part of what we were actually doing in the project. So the transition from Oak Ridge into Fed Square and Future Food System was probably more about, you know, we could have stayed at Oak Ridge for a long time. It was really, we were learning. There were lots of projects and they were ongoing, but you only live once. And to challenge and something that we all really believe in about the food system and, you know, being positive about it as well. I think there's a lot of negativity around all the problems that we have as an industry and, you know, as a planet in general. But being part of a solution and an empowering solution for people was really exciting, and probably why we jumped at the idea.
It does definitely sound like, you know, you have to just jump in and not ask too many questions, because if you ask the questions, you probably convince yourselves it's not the right thing to do. Because I can imagine that the journey you went on with, you know, the challenges you must have faced in getting the project up and running. So had you decided what you wanted to grow, and has that changed from what you're growing now before you sort of moved in and the build had finished? How did that all work?
Things have definitely changed along the way. And that's just through learning and experience. We knew that there were going to be a lot of different varieties of things. I think we're all surprised at how much food was growing straight away. I remember harvesting before the build was done. So I think it was more a surprise of, oh, wow, this actually works. And then up to, I guess, now things that aren't working. That's been a real eye-opener. I don't know, what do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, we're just growing seasonal food, so it's things that we would have always grown in back out at Oak Ridge in the garden, things that we grow here at our other place here in Northcote. I think the biggest surprise for me is growing grains and pulses. I've always assumed you need to have vast, like our trip to Mount Zero, where you look at those olive groves and where the chickpeas and stuff are growing. It's as far as you can see, it's this stuff growing because it's on such a large scale. But from a couple of barrels of chickpeas, we had enough chickpeas to serve to guests and to, get a really decent crop from. Buckwheat is another one that, it grows really fast. You can get I reckon you could probably get 6 harvests a year from buckwheat. It's that prolific. It's also nitrogen fixing, so it fixes soil from, where you've had really hungry plants like corn or cabbage and tomatoes, stuff that takes a lot of nutrients out. These crops actually thrive and fix the soil, where they were grown. So I think that sort of, because we went from humongous 3 gardens, greenhouse, huge growing potential full-time gardeners at Oak Ridge to a few barrels on a balcony, essentially. But the whole house is 87 square meters, and that would have been half of our smallest garden at Oak Ridge, So seeing the scale on which you can produce, a huge amount of food is really cool. And then further than just, growing the vegetables and stuff, we've watched trout grow from baby fingerlings to plate size. We've had yabbies that have reproduced, tiny little yabbies that are now, mature yabbies that are about to have their own little yabby babies. There's been aquaponics issues, figuring stuff out through the whole journey. Barramundi have been a real challenge to grow, but we've had some good success, and then we've had some challenges and back and forth. And we're about to start growing Murray cod, which is a really cool another native species of fish that is quite delicious and thrives in an aquaponic system. So yeah, I think the plant stuff we had a good handle on, but we were surprised with the productivity and yield. So then when you start farming, aquaponics and stuff, that was a big learning curve. But it's also, it really opens up the idea of there's so much unutilized space in cities. It could be productive food areas. This tiny house is a really great example of the fact that our cities can be absolutely as productive as any agricultural area. And in fact, it's probably would make more sense. A building like the Rialto Tower here in Melbourne has something like 11,000 litres of grey water a day that could be easily, watering plants that were on the exterior of the building or even on the roof or, inside in lobbies and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's definitely the cities have much greater potential to grow and produce food than we're really giving them a chance to, I think.
There's all those rooftops and, in Australia, we're so lucky with the amount of sun that we get. So it's almost, it's incredible that it's not happening.
The rainfall in Melbourne is huge. The amount of rain that washes off roofs and doesn't get, filtered through soil and cleaned and adding to nourishing. If we had roof gardens, the temperature of the city would be a lot less through summer. It would be warmer through winter. These kind of ideas are spoken about, but not really put into place. It's always difficult dealing with councils and regulations and stuff like that. But given the chance, to green our cities would have a huge impact on climate change. It would have a huge impact on people's diets, and people would simply be eating more delicious local food.
So when you cook for people in the house, they come and have the beautiful menus that you put together from whatever's growing at that point in time. Do you bring any ingredients in, or is everything on the menu from the house?
No, we top up on ingredients. Initially this place was never meant to be a restaurant at all. Through leaving Oak Ridge and through the last, period of time, we turned it into a restaurant because we're cooks, and the greatest way for us to share these ideas was through plates of food and bringing people in. So we top up on ingredients for our guests, but the rule is it has to be growing or had grown or about to be grown at the house. So, the vegetables are in the garden, but we might buy a few more from, organic farms. Things like aquaponics, to serve fish, we would put too much. We probably could grow enough at the house, but the fish and stuff would be under much more condensed situation. So, yeah, and I think it's also really great to support people that are doing great things, in farming as well. So, yeah, we definitely top up. And, the cuisine that we're creating, though, is all things that are urban crops. So there's no dairy, no, the proteins of fish and insects. Having a cricket farm is so cool to be able to grow crickets and enough. We've had huge success with farming crickets and they're eating waste, outside leaves of cauliflowers and stuff that is definitely edible but not often used. So yeah, it's been a really interesting journey with that. But there's some crops that we've definitely grown enough of, ample of, that we've then fermented and stuff as well. So
I think people being able to come in and dine in the house is a really fantastic way for you to be able to demonstrate that some of these alternative ways of cooking are not only viable and also necessary for us to look at, but also absolutely delicious. Because I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges is people think, oh, crickets or snails or whatever it might be. But that leads to a really interesting conversation, I think, about what the future holds in terms of alternative proteins. I think we have to open our eyes to what they are and what they could be. So what has been your experience of growing and cooking with alternative proteins?
Oh, the crickets have been awesome. We had cooked with them in the past and had them, they were frozen, but harvesting crickets, they taste completely different. They produce really quickly, so they lay eggs nearly every week. And it was really cool. We didn't probably know that much about them when we got them. And one of our first dinners, we had some guests come in, and I think they were from Singapore or maybe from China, and they were speaking Mandarin. We didn't understand what they were talking about, but they were huddled around the MCG, which we call it the Melbourne Cricket Ground, and they were talking and trying to get them upstairs to invite them up to have a drink. And they were just, talking away over the crickets. And one lady turned to me and she's like, "Oh, you've got a lot of females in there." And I nearly fell over. I was like, "What do you mean?" And then, I guess was actually the one to tell us about how to distinguish between males and females and how they lay eggs and the whole history behind crickets in China. So a lot of the alternative proteins are just, normal in other cultures. And that's probably been a part of learning about cooking these things, is that we're just looking to other cultures and history of what and how they've been cooked. And that's been really fun because it's just like a little rabbit hole kind of open up, and you see that what we think is the future of food has actually been around for a very long time. And people have been really open to, I don't think it's necessarily just putting a cricket on a plate or frying a cricket and eating it. It's what you can do with drying them and turning them into seasonings or into flours, adding them to things. And that's been a big part of, if we are serving protein or trout or barramundi, things like that, not necessarily just serving them as a piece of fish. It's heroing what they're going with or adding them, incorporating them into a dish, and maybe not making it the full centerpiece and steering more into different vegetables and grains. And, mushrooms have been a really big part of the diet at the house because they're so easy to grow, and there's so many different varieties that we didn't even know about, especially native Australian varieties that are absolutely delicious and people are loving them.
Yeah. Yeah, the mushroom looks amazing, and it's a real centerpiece of the house, isn't it, as you walk in. So there's a lot of talk about sustainability and food production, and you guys, I guess, have you grow your own food as well as cook, so you've got a real first-hand experience of what's involved in being self-sustaining and zero waste. What are the things that can happen immediately to change the way our industry's sort of operating? I think people are very engaged in the idea of it, but they don't really know what they could do to change or move things forward. So what are the things you would recommend people could consider doing from an industry perspective?
The easiest thing to do is eat locally and seasonally. That's a huge thing. And I think people kind of might overlook that. But the more localized and the more seasonal your food is, first of all, it's at its cheapest generally, and it's at its most delicious. So, instead of buying asparagus in winter or autumn that's come from Mexico or Peru, wait for the local asparagus, and it's more exciting and it's more yummy. Yeah, I think it's so simple to make a massive change, is to eat locally and eat seasonally. And then when you start that, by always carrying bags with you, always having a coffee cup with you, just basic stuff that once it becomes habit, you don't even realize you're doing it. But, and you don't have to do everything all at once. We've built this house that's an extreme sort of experiment into what is possible, but nothing is too small. No changes are too small. Like even if it's growing a pot of parsley on your balcony instead of in a plastic bag that's been trucked around the countryside, been in and out of cold storage, packed onto shelves, handled by other people, having a simple pot and picking what you need. You're not going to waste anything. It's not, using electricity to store it, and it's not coming in a little plastic bag. Composting, is another great way to minimize, food that's going into landfill, which is just ridiculous. We're creating synthetic fertilizers and putting natural fertilizers into landfill. That's a really broken system. So, yeah, I think just gradual steps and nothing's too small is a really good start.
Jo, what are your tips?
Yeah, I think for industries and kitchens, cooking for a lot of people, I think composting is really underutilized. That's probably something that it really clicked with me about nature not having any waste, and our waste going back in as food. That's been a real sticking point about this house because, soil nutrients comes from waste, and it's a big thing. So I think for restaurants, compost is a must. That would really help the food system as well. You would really get an idea of how much green waste you're having. So probably start utilizing things a bit better. You'd see how much plastic you've got. So that is a really big eye-opener, I think, composting.
Do you think the change needs to come from the industry to help consumers change, or do you think we need to sort of drive it from both angles? Because ultimately we're cooking for people that will pay a price to eat that meal. So what comes first, do you think?
Yeah. It's funny because I think originally I probably would have said it comes from the industry, but it's been really interesting. We did a bit of work with Country Road, which sounds a bit funny, but they had a heap of pressure from their, database and their client base around where their clothes were being made. And it pushed them to make a Melbourne-made jumper where everything has come from Melbourne, and it took them a long time to develop. But
oh, wow.
I don't know if necessarily they would have done that on their own. It's come from the demand of questioning where's that coming from, who's making it, how's it dyed. So I think it is a bit of both. I think it would be smart for the industry to be on the front foot to make the change. And I think it is, really smart for, if you're interested in this stuff and you start questioning it, and lots of people do start questioning it when they're eating out or they're going to the supermarket, there'll be a market for it because, ultimately people, I think they're passionate about the environment, but it also has to add up, on a business side. So people see that there's customers there who, are willing to pay, and there's a demand for it. They're probably more willing to make the change.
I think also there's this myth that cooking food that way or growing your own food or doing what you're doing in the house is a really time-consuming, labour-intensive process. Is it? Because you're both looking really relaxed today. I thought you'd be looking frazzled and, had a million things to do. But so what is it? Is it a very time-consuming process? Like, what do your days look like day in, day out?
It is for sure. We're lucky that we've been cooks for a long time, so a lot of this stuff's quite intuitive for us to do in terms of preserving vegetables and preserving abundance and stuff like that. I think it's how you sort of dedicate your time, right? It's how everyone's in control of their own time. And if you want to make time to grow food and make food from scratch, then you'll find that time. So I think it's having the desire to want to do it, really. Like, if you're not a cook, if you don't love cooking, then living this way wouldn't really work for you. Like, it's not for everyone, right? So there's levels of effect of how these things can work, from the household to the food you're buying to the whole food system. So it definitely is, and it's living this way is not for everyone. Like, if there was 6 kids running around, it'd be a nightmare. So for us, I think we're really lucky in the position that we're in as cooks, and our sort of profile in the industry is that we have a voice that we can share through, things like this podcast, things like social media. They're all really valuable tools. So I think we, as cooks with this sort of profile we have, it's almost, it's up to us to share these messages and share these ideas. And the amount of stuff, engagement we get on things like Instagram when we post, dishes that we've made from waste or ingredients that would be waste or, different sort of cooking techniques. People are really interested in it. So I think, a lot of it's got to be led by people like us. And, there's a whole host of cooks around the country that are really closely followed by people at home that have a big influence. So I think it's almost our obligation to help with this stuff for sure.
There are aspects of it that are really convenient, though, that makes it easy. If I think there's an initial setup of time, but then just incorporating it on your day-to-day and making it convenient for yourself to be growing things, it does become a lot easier, growing some lettuce for salads, and then you don't have to go to the supermarket to buy salad all the time. That, for me, is just like, oh, it's so easy. You don't have to think about what you're going to cook because it's just there and you're like, well, that's what we're going to be eating. So that side of it, to take out the guesswork of what to cook and just be guided by what's growing, is actually really, really convenient in that aspect.
Yeah, it's nice not having to go to the supermarket all the time.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's just that initial investment in time pays off in absolute, just really the flavour of the food you're growing, the convenience, the ability to just be so in the moment of what's growing and what's out there on your balcony. So you've got the rest of the year in the house. How long are you there for, and what's next?
So we're there until April. So it's actually Jost's mum, Leah, her house. So the house is modular and it will be split back into the modules. And then in April, begin to be pulled apart and taken out to Mumbolc and resurrected, which is really exciting because there are a few parts of the house that aren't finished just because it's not its final resting place. So to see the house come down and be rebuilt will be really exciting. I can't wait to see what it will look like. And I guess for the future, it's just to continue with this message of, what's possible. I think that's been the biggest learning experience for me personally. Is there's been challenges when we've taken away sugar and wheat and things that, for us, they're things that come easy. And I know that we can produce delicious food, but taking them away and challenging and learning has been really fun. So, I'm looking forward to introducing some of those things back in and then seeing what we can do with it and, helping, if people do have questions and the industry does want to make a change, just, assisting and being a part of those changes is really exciting.
Yeah, it's fantastic to be able to share what you're doing because Tawnya and I, through Straight to the Source, believe so passionately in it as well. And, it's been very much behind what we've been doing for the last 8 to 10 years of connecting people to, connecting industry to the people that produce the food they're sourcing, but they don't necessarily ever make that direct contact with. And it certainly changes the way you think about where you get your food and what you do with it. And as you said, seasonal food flavor, regional flavor, it's just also important in terms of what you experience on the plate. I meant to ask you earlier, is anyone else in the world doing anything like this, or is this a first?
In terms of Wastefree restaurants, Douglas McMaster in the UK, who was our head chef of Silo here in Melbourne when we created that, he's taken the name and the brand of Silo to the UK and doing really great stuff. There's a lot of chefs that are doing really great things, but and there's a lot of people that are living this way as well. So I think the combination of delivering a high-end restaurant experience with a house with the parameters that we have, I would think that I don't know of anyone else that's doing things so hard, but definitely the elements separately, there is people, really excelling. And that's been a really big part of this project is we don't know at all. It's a lot of collaborations with, builders and farmers and all sorts of people to get to where we are now. So yeah, definitely we haven't come up with all of this stuff ourselves. We've collaborated with a lot of great, really helpful people. So yeah, there's definitely some awesome things happening around. And, I think if you can engage with community city gardens and stuff like that as well, you can become a part of these kind of communities pretty easily.
Yeah, it's been just incredible to see how much food and what you can produce in an urban environment. It's unbelievable. And I think that's what's worked out really well with putting it in Fed Square. It's just such a contrast to, this amazing Melbourne city backdrop. And then the house just kind of blends in and looks like it's been there forever, but it's like overflowing with plants. And, I think the vision for Jost is that eventually, walk through the city and lots of buildings are overflowing with plants, and we do reconnect with our ecosystem. And that's, I think, a big part of it is realizing that just as an individual, you do have a role to play, and that you are a part of it. You're not above it, or you just the link amongst it. And that's the beauty of the house, is just realizing that, when we step out of it, it doesn't work properly. So you just have to take your place within the ecosystem.
Yeah. So don't think about it too much. Just jump. Just jump in, feet first, like you guys have.
Be a part of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you for taking this journey on behalf of everyone that's interested in, zero waste and self-sustaining living. It's incredible to watch what you're doing. And, I think everyone's really looking forward to hearing and learning more as you finish the journey over the course of the next year. Before we wrap up, I've just got one last question for you each. Who would you like to hear on a future Straight to the Source podcast?
Adam James from Hobart in Tassie, Rough Rice. He's an extremely interesting guy that probably, there's a lot of, really great fermenters in Australia, but I think his knowledge is phenomenal, and he's really generous with his time and knowledge. And he's travelled the world, learning about fermentation techniques from really ancient cultures. So he's definitely someone that would be worth having a chat with for sure.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I've been watching his journey, and we'd love to have a chat with Adam. And Jo?
I don't know if there's a certain individual, but I love the idea of people who make artisan equipment for specific cooking techniques, even if it was fermenting crocks or knife makers or, farming equipment that have been around forever, flour mills, people who really specialize in techniques of cooking, artisan cooking equipment would be really cool, I think.
Okay. So again, kind of just turning the clock back to not only old cooking techniques, but the equipment they used to actually make to fulfill those processes.
Yeah, yesterday, because we grow oats, we use an oat roller, and, a lot of people didn't even realize the process. Well, a lot of people don't realize the process behind what a groat is to a rolled oat, and going through how to do that with equipment is really, really cool. Or, stone milling for wheat. There's all these amazing growers, and then that person, a farmer might not be a miller, and they're not a baker. So I think there's always that little missing gap of the people who do the artisan processing.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, we'll have to do some investigation into that, and we'll let you know what we unearth. Thank you both so much for joining us today. It's been really, really fascinating hearing a bit more about what you're doing with Future Food System, and we're looking forward to continuing watching your journey and learning from you. But thank you for being so generous with your time, and we look forward to catching up when we get down to Melbourne.
Thanks for having us.
It was awesome.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in with us today. We really hope you enjoyed listening as much as we've enjoyed the conversation. You'll find links to anything mentioned in today's chat in the show notes. We have some extraordinary guests lined up, and we'd love for you to join us again. Please make sure you're following us on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss future episodes. We'd love feedback, good or bad, or perhaps a guest you'd love to hear from. Please just let us know. And the best way to stay up to date with what we're doing, who we're talking to, and where you'll find us around the country is to become part of our Straight to the Source community at straighttothesource.com.au/community. Until next time.